My name's Janice, and I'm 27 years old. Some time ago, I opened a TikTok account. I love to sing, and I mostly uploaded videos of my vocal performances. I was surprised to see how much positive feedback and likes I was getting. A few haters here and there, but I guess that was to be expected. One day, I received a letter. A good old-fashioned letter right in my mailbox. The name of the sender simply stated, "From a fan," and there was no address. The letter said, "I love your voice. It does wonders for me. It's pure magic." In theory, this was a nice message, but I was genuinely frightened because this unknown person knew my address, and I had no idea why or who that person was, and what intentions he or she had towards me. That night, I told my boyfriend Carl about it. "There are lots of people out there on the internet who have ways to capture our addresses. It's the price to pay for going public, Janice," he said. "Are you saying this is my fault, creating a TikTok account?" "Of course not. I'm simply stating how things work. Listen, I'll put some security cameras around the house. In any case, I think you should wait a few weeks before uploading more videos," my boyfriend said. And I agreed, of course. Carl and I were living together, and he acted like a real husband. Next day, there were cameras all over the house, capturing the surroundings. I felt safer. I didn't upload any more videos, but I was still checking out those that were already there. And I read a specific comment in a few of them. "Sad that you're not sharing more of your magical voice. It does wonders for me." It was from someone who had the nickname Male Mermaid. I assumed it had to be the same person who sent me the letter. The words were similar. I told my boyfriend. "Well, maybe it's just some lonely and harmless guy. Doesn't seem to be angry. He's probably needy. Hopefully he'll find someone or something else to keep him entertained," Carl said, showing his usual optimism, which I love, but sometimes he can be careless. I was scared and decided to simply terminate my TikTok account. I thought that would make things easier for Male Mermaid. One night, my boyfriend and I were getting ready to go out. We were heading to a rock concert. But Carl was acting strange, as if his mind was somewhere else. "Carl, are you fine? You seem to be off. Do you want to stay home instead?" I asked. No, I'm just tired. I look forward to the concert. We've been waiting for it since a few months now. It'll be good for us. Have fun. Get out of the house. Yeah," he said. "Okay, if you still want to go, great," I replied. We went to the concert, but I couldn't get my eyes off of my boyfriend. There was something unsettling about him, but I wasn't able to tell what. Like my sixth sense was speaking to me, but I had no idea what it was. I assumed I was still stressed out about Male Mermaid, and probably that was also what was going on with Carl, and he simply didn't want to worry me about his own concerns. When we were returning home, Carl was driving, I realized my boyfriend was taking a different road. "Where are we going, Carl? Do you need to stop at some place to get something?" I asked. "Yes, dear, I do. Don't worry, it won't be long." "But where?" "Carl, you're scaring me now. You're not acting like yourself. The whole night I felt this way." "Well, that's because I'm not Carl. I'm the Male Mermaid." "What kind of sick joke is this? Carl, stop the car. Let's talk," I shouted. "We're almost there, dear. Almost there," Carl said, with a numb, almost spacey voice. I was screaming. I was so shocked and terrified that I didn't know what else to do. I couldn't jump out of the moving car or attack Carl. Both could be fatal. "Don't scream, my dear. Sing. Your voice, it does wonders for me," Carl said. At this point, I stopped screaming and just felt like I was in a bad dream and fell asleep from exhaustion. When I woke up, I was lying in a bed inside a bedroom that was completely alien to me. At least there was a lamp, which meant that I could see. The bedroom was small with only one bed. I got up and tried to open the door. It was locked. I started punching the door and screaming. "What's going on? Carl! At least tell me what's happening. I can't take this anymore. Carl!" Someone answered from the other side of the door. "Hello, Janice. Carl's asleep now. He was very helpful, although he wasn't acting on his own will. Who are you? What do you want? I'm Male Mermaid. I call myself like that because I'm enchanted by wonderful female voices. In ancient times, mermaids used to sing in order to seduce and to trap sailors. This time it's a little different. I trapped you because I'm seduced by your voice. I was able to hypnotize Carl. It wasn't hard, I just had to wait for the right moment. You see, I'm a skilled and powerful hypnotist, and like I said, your voice does wonders for me. I'm a tormented soul, Janice. I need you, the man said. If you're a tormented soul, get some therapy. Just let me out of here, and my boyfriend too, I shouted. No, not until I find someone else who has the same effect as you. Till then, you'll sing for me. I will allow you to leave the bedroom, of course, for all basic reasons, but you will behave and do as I say, or your boyfriend will die. I can make him kill himself. Not even the police could accuse me of murder. Now, start singing. Right now! I need my peace of mind. I need your voice, the disturbed man said. I didn't have much of a choice. At least for the moment, I had to do what the man ordered, so I started to sing. Ah, excellent. Thank you. Keep going. A few more minutes, the man said, and so I did. Which was Male Mermaid's mistake. Although I could not see things beyond the door, I heard noises. I heard my boyfriend shouting, insulting, and beating Male Mermaid. Janice, I'm gonna get you out of there. Don't you worry, my love. Carl's voice, his real voice, felt like the most beautiful song I had ever heard. Carl unlocked the bedroom and I got out. My boyfriend had beaten the shit out of the mermaid until he lost his consciousness. For sure, the police would understand that, as we immediately informed the authorities. It wasn't hard to identify the address and the location, thanks to some letters that we found in the house, and of course the GPS. Male Mermaid was a middle-aged man, bald, fat, with small rat eyes. He was taken into custody. We warned the police about his hypnotizing skills. Ironically, it was precisely my singing that allowed Carl to enter a trance-like state of mind whenever he would start hypnotizing his victims. Huh. I guess Male Mermaid was right. My voice did end up being magical. But not the way that he expected, fortunately. I'd always sensed I was different since I was a teenager, at least, if I wasn't sure as a child. And being different in society I lived in only meant one thing. I'd always wanted to help myself from this stark reality that faced me. This same reality that thrilled me as much as it drove me to a certain end. If I knew how to help myself, I would not have sat in front of my computer that rainy evening with a lit cigarette in my hand, typing away at the computer. I tried as much as I could to subdue how giddy I felt as months of talking with Amira did not end in disappointment. Trust. It was the most valuable currency for people like Amira and I who were different, who dared to love differently. We could love. It didn't matter. I had never felt love like hers, and I had never committed to something so intense until I had wound up on a dating site on the dark web. It was the only way women like us could love each other in a country that legally prohibited loving differently, like Amira and I loved each other, with punishments as strict as capital punishment. I knew what I felt when her message had come in on that first occasion, and I'd replied. I'd been wary, but then we spoke some more and I wasn't anymore. I had loved Amira since that night months ago when she had written me a poem. It was the most thoughtful thing anybody had ever done for me. It caused me to open up to her by degrees. Months later, we'd begun to exchange pictures, and Amira was so beautiful she made my heart stop. She'd mentioned I was beautiful, too. Our relationship had since taken beautiful turns, and for what it was worth, our lives even, we had decided to risk our lives to love our physical bodies, even if it were for a moment. Amira agreed to my invitation, and I prepared for her coming. Come on, I muttered after snatching a drag of my cigarette to ease my quivering fingers. I watched the rain shower furiously, knowing my lover was out in the cold and coming to me for the first time, and I wondered to myself if I'd not done something foolish. My phone screen lit up before I could sink into the thought. Then it rang suddenly. "Hey!" she yelled through the phone, trying to speak over the thrashing rain in vague terms. "I think I just arrived at your house with the books you ordered. Can you come take them?" "All right, I'll be downstairs in a minute," I said, unraveling the code in her words. The perfect disguise to hide that we were lovers just trying to get together. My image reflecting off the mirror flashed past my eyes as I went straight to the door, and I smiled. I looked beautiful, and I was sure she would appreciate the effort to dress up for her. I pulled the door open, and I gasped when I saw Amira for the first time in the flesh. She had no reaction, but simply walked straight towards me with a straight face. "Good evening, Sadia," she said, ignoring my call for embrace. She looked over her shoulders into my quiet corridor, and I sensed her eyes stiff with fear. I hadn't seen her so shaken in the pictures, and I immediately was corrupted by her panic. "I think I'm being followed by a man." The muscles of my chest contracted, causing me some ache that pierced my core. My ears whirred, and my whole world fell into a dull aspect. A troubling cold shot ran through my body. I saw the strange outline of a stalker marching behind her in the pouring rain. "Quick!" I heaved, wrestling off the fear which sought to cripple me. It was not how I'd planned our first meeting, and the fact that I was disappointed took secondary priority. I had wanted to bask in her fine scent, and her in mine, not the shared sense of alarm that made our teeth grate in our mouths. Amira shivered, and I blamed myself for causing her so much trouble. She was in my house, and I felt so much responsibility for her. "Did anybody know you'd be coming here?" I asked in wonder. "No, I didn't tell anybody. They'd have us killed," Amira reasoned. I tapped my fingers on my thighs as I saw through a ravaging, deep pool of thought. All of the fears made me hot, and the harsh sting of the cigarette smoke lining my nostrils made me sick. I stared into Amira's eyes and had a request for her in my head. "I'll be by the door, Amira. This is my home, and I should be able to protect myself. Go into my kitchen. You'd find knives. Protect yourself," I said to her and pointed her in the direction of the kitchen. Amira marched along quickly, and just as she made the bend, a knock came on my door. My heart sank to my stomach. My vision became blurry, and I shut my eyes a few times to clear it up. Then I turned to the door and pulled it open, oblivious of what to expect.
"I know what you are doing,"
a shriveled-looking man, drenched in the rain, said to me, as though it were a sufficient introduction to justify his presence. "Excuse me? Who are you?"
"You lesbians, going against Allah and society."
He spat, and his fury grew. I had no idea what to make of it, and it made my horrified mind run wild. "Who are you?" I repeated.
"The one who puts an end to your sin,"
he said, and he jumped on me with all of his manly strength. With his hands wrapped around my neck, I feared he would crush my windpipe from the force he applied, as I could not breathe. I tapped on his hands, yelling for him to let go of my neck, but he was relentless, even as I slipped into blackness from choking. With all of the force in my female body, I thrashed, but it was in futility as he was stronger. I feared for my life, but I also feared for Amira's. There was no illusion in me that he would find her. I hated the justification he would have for his crime. He would murder 2 gay women. It brought me pain in those moments that my life began to slip from me. I wheezed for breath, and when I saw the large knife stuck to his throat, I flinched on the floor. His body was rigid, and I knew what had happened to him. I turned to Amira, my lover and my savior, and I was ready for thankfulness. "Thank you, baby," I cried, and Amira fell into my hands for that beautiful first real-time embrace.
I'd been working as a sandwich artist at Subway for the last 2 years. It wasn't the highest paying job, but my boss Dave had been great about working around my class schedule, so it seemed like the best option for me before I graduated. I usually worked evenings, meaning the hours were slow, especially right before we closed at 10. That was the time we'd get really sketchy people, often homeless men who'd finally scrounged enough money to buy a 6-inch. Occasionally, guys would come in who were very clearly tripping on you-know-what, and I'd have to treat them very carefully. Because I was always the only worker there, my mother often worried that something bad would happen. She begged me to get a safer job, but I always told her everything was totally safe, and I genuinely believed that too. This all went down a few hours ago. I was 30 minutes from closing up, and I hadn't had a single customer in over an hour. We had rules against using our phones during work hours, so I had to just stand there and wait. I guess I was zoning out because I didn't notice the man walk in until he was standing right in front of the counter. He was in his 20s, a few years older than me, and jarringly handsome. Tall, muscular, dark eyes that seemed to bore into me. He looked like a movie star. I asked him what he wanted, and instead of answering my question, he said, "You're all alone here, huh?" It was such a strange thing to say, but I didn't feel scared. Not yet, anyway. I guess that's how it goes. Beautiful people like this guy could say whatever creepy things they wanted and never strike the wrong nerve. Again, I asked him what he wanted. He smiled and ordered a tuna sandwich. As I went through the typical questions, what size, what kind of bread, he reached into his pocket and pulled out a small black object. I didn't recognize it until he held it up and started staring at it. This was a taser. One of those things that policemen use to shock people. "What are you doing?" I asked. He didn't answer my question, instead listing off all the vegetables he wanted on the sandwich. He didn't look at me, just staring at the taser as if it was the most fascinating thing in the world. I didn't move. Fear coursed through me, and it was like I had no control over my body. My arms hung uselessly at my sides. "Did you hear me?" he asked. I said I wanted tomatoes. When I still didn't move, he stuck the taser towards me. "Have you ever felt 50,000 volts course through your body?" "I haven't, but I'm sure it's not pleasant." "What do you want?" My voice sounded so high-pitched, so weak I could barely breathe. "Tomatoes and lettuce," he shouted. And then he laughed. "And I want you, Tracy." Hearing this lunatic say my name out loud felt like the worst possible violation. It felt wrong. I had a name tag, so customers sometimes called me by my name, but it didn't happen often, and it didn't feel like this. Then I realized that I wasn't wearing my name tag. Somehow this psycho already knew who I was. "Who are you?" I asked. By that point, I had regained some control over my body. I inched backwards. "No one," he said. Then he smiled slowly. "You know, this is a pretty dangerous part of town, especially this time of night." He moved the taser closer. "A pretty girl like you? You shouldn't be here." "Don't hurt me," I said. "I'll give you everything in the register." He shook his head. "No." He didn't move for the longest time, just waiting with his weapon outstretched. One side of his mouth quirked upwards into a smile. Then he lowered the taser. "Actually, I don't want a sandwich anymore. See you around, Tracy." He turned to leave, moving slowly, casually. A normal person would have raced into the back room, locked the door, and called the police. That's what I should have done. But something came over me in the moment, complete and total anger. I'd never been threatened like that before. I never looked danger in the face. Before I realized what I was even doing, I grabbed one of the sandwich knives from the counter and raced after him. In seconds, I tackled him to the ground. I screamed something at him, right in his face, but in the excitement of the moment, I don't remember what I said. As he fell, the taser skidded out of his hand. He struggled to get free, but I held him down. His legs kicked under me, but I wouldn't budge. I pushed the knife against his throat. "Who are you?" I screamed into his face. "What do you want?" Stop, he begged. His eyes welled with tears. Just seconds ago, he looked like a psychotic killer. Now he was bawling like a baby. Still pressing the knife against his skin, I reached over and grabbed the taser. When I held it in my other hand, I realized that it was a fake. It was a toy. He jerked to the side, trying to get away, but in that movement, my knife accidentally cut into his throat. I saw blood oozing out. He started to choke. "Who are you?" I said again. Your mother," he spurted. Blood was coming out of his mouth. "What? My mother? Your mother paid me to scare you," he sputtered. She wants you to quit. She wants you to find a safer job. I'm just an actor." More blood oozed out. Instantly, I jumped off him. I stood over his twitching body as he held onto his neck. I called 911, of course, and then told him to send an ambulance right away. It took them 5 minutes to get there. By then, the man had lost a lot of blood. I'm at the police station now, and I have no idea how to explain what happened. I guess I'll tell them the truth. I'll tell them that I didn't mean to slash that man's throat. But who knows if they'll believe me? You believe me, don't you? You know that it was all just an accident, right?
When Jackson got sick, my wife and I had no idea what to do. He'd always been a healthy baby. He never cried, he never got sick, and he had more energy than anyone I'd ever met. By the time he turned 14, though, I started to notice that he wasn't running around as much as before. His grades dropped, he was always out of breath, and his skin was turning pale. Sarah thought everything was okay, and the doctors couldn't find anything wrong, but I knew in my heart that something bad was happening with our boy. After a few years of Jackson getting sicker and sicker, we finally took him to a better hospital outside the city. They knew right away that his kidneys were failing. We'd waited too long to ask for help. I'll never forget the look on Dr. Klein's face when he gave us the bad news. Jackson would need a transplant, or he wouldn't reach his 19th birthday. Sarah and I did all the tests to see if we were matches, but we weren't so lucky. Jackson was adopted, and neither of us could donate. Dr. Klein explained that they'd put him on an organ donor waiting list, but there was no guarantee that a donor would come forward in time. Because he wasn't a minor anymore, his birthday was 2 weeks before Jackson wouldn't be given priority. We might get lucky, but there was also a chance that we might lose our son forever. Sarah was inconsolable. She couldn't stop crying. I had to deliver the news to our son, and I had to keep our household going, keep everything in order, because Sarah wasn't fit to do anything. Jackson was a senior now, but he was too weak to finish off the school year. He started taking online classes. It was honestly the worst week of my life, and I very quickly got desperate. My brother Sam came over to check in on us and drop off some food. While Sarah and Jackson were eating, he pulled me into the other room and said he had a plan. He was always on the internet, and he knew about people that could help us. He was talking about the dark web. At first, I couldn't imagine resorting to something like that, something dangerous and illegal, but he convinced me that it was the only way. The system wasn't working for us, so I had to do something drastic. Sam explained that he could help, but we both decided that no one else could find out. So the next day, while Sarah was with Jackson at the hospital, Sam and I got on his laptop and found an unnamed organization that promised to solve all our problems. In a private chat room, we talked with someone with the username Liverheart. Whoever this Liverheart was, he answered all my questions, and for the first time since Jackson's diagnosis, I felt hopeful. He said that I could bring Jackson to a warehouse outside of town and they'd perform the operation. All I needed to do was send him Jackson's medical records, plus a small payment. I asked him how much money he needed, and he said $30,000. It was a lot of money, but I knew I could dip into my personal account. Liverheart gave me directions to transfer everything into crypto and send it to him as soon as possible. I gave him the medical records, and he got back to me that they already had a match. Sam worried that this was too good to be true, even though this was his idea in the first place, but I couldn't say no. After all, we'd waited too long to help Jackson before, and I wouldn't make the same mistake again. I figured out how to convert the money, and with one final moment of hesitation, I transferred the money. Instantly, Liverheart sent a single message. It was the address to the warehouse. Then, all communication stopped. I knew the risks. All my life, I'd never even gotten a speeding ticket, let alone broken a law of this magnitude. I was worried about getting caught, but I told myself it was what I needed to do to keep my boy alive. Mere minutes after I'd sent the payment and gotten the address, my phone buzzed. I thought it was Liverheart, but the call came from Sarah. I considered not answering. Sarah could have sensed from my voice that something was up, but I answered anyway. "Brad!" she screamed. "He's getting a kidney!" I gulped. She explained that the hospital had found a perfect match, and they'd be able to do the operation that day. She was talking so fast that I could barely understand her. When I hung up, Sam asked me what was wrong. I said, "Nothing's wrong. Jackson's going to be fine." The laptop was still open, so I sent one more message to Liverheart. "Thanks, but I'm pulling out of the deal." No reply. I added, "You can keep the money." Still no reply. Sam assured me that there'd be no problems. The anonymous organ dealer had gotten what he wanted, and he'd be able to use the kidney for someone else. Still, I couldn't shake the feeling that I'd done something very wrong, something I couldn't take back. I went straight to the hospital and waited for Jackson to receive his operation. Apparently, a person about his age had gotten into a car accident earlier in the day, and he'd been a perfect match for Jackson. It was a terrible situation for that poor boy, but it would save Jackson's life. Sarah and I waited for hours until the doctors came out to say that the operation had been a success. He'd stay in the hospital for a few days, and then we'd be able to take him home. Sarah opted to stay there with him, but she told me that it would be best if I waited at home. I didn't argue. When I got home that night, I noticed that the front door was unlocked. I never left my door unlocked, but maybe in the excitement of the day I'd overlooked it. I wasn't sure. I walked inside and everything seemed normal. Just in case, I checked the entire house. The whole time, my pulse was racing. I kept thinking about Liverheart. Was he angry that I canceled the deal? After checking every room in the house, I knew that I was alone. I went to my bedroom and calmed myself down. I sat on the bed. My heart was still throbbing. Then, I heard a rustle coming from under my bed. Slowly, I leaned over and looked under the bed. It was too dark to see anything, but I knew there was a movement. I jumped off the bed and stepped backward. Slowly, a man came out of the darkness. He wore a Guy Fawkes mask.
"No one cancels on me,"
he said. His voice was surprisingly high-pitched, almost like a child. Liverheart?
"We needed your son,"
he said. "But you got your money," I told him.
"Not enough,"
he replied. That's when I knew that he had never planned to help us. He was going to take my son and steal his organs, not help him. I realized that Jackson's medical records had included our home address. He must have come right over when I canceled the deal. "But you can't take him," I said.
"Stupid man,"
he told me.
"We were never going to mess with your sick, defective boy. We wanted you."
As soon as he said that, I heard footsteps behind me. 3 more men entered the room, all wearing the same masks. 2 held scalpels. 1 had a syringe of God knows what. They were surrounding me, and I knew I was going to die. I'm not a strong man, and normally I would never be able to fight off 4 grown men. But all I could think about was Jackson, about how he was going to live, about how I had to be there for him. So I used all my strength, more strength than I knew I had, to push the men aside and race out of the house. I honestly don't remember how I got out of there, but in seconds, I was out of the front door, in my car, and speeding down the road. I went straight to the police station, ready to admit what I did. They sent officers to my house, but there was no sign that anyone was there. More officers went to the warehouse address, but the place was completely empty. I'm safe for now, but I know that those men are still out there, still waiting to get me alone. I don't know what to do, but at least I know that Jackson's safe. For now. My name's Peter, and I'm 30 years old. I used to have my own business, a small restaurant in which I was also the cook. Unfortunately, due to the lockdown, I was forced to shut it down. I was also spending a lot of time alone at home. I did have some savings, which allowed me to go through that hideous period without losing my house. Plus, I was using the internet to have some occasional online freelance jobs. Everything from translation, I speak Spanish fluently, to website management. I guess you could say I'm a natural entrepreneur and a hyperactive workaholic, which was good for me. I was also using the internet for online social conversations, specifically Omegle. I spoke to some interesting women, and some weird dudes as well. Overall, I was having fun. At one occasion, I met a particularly odd woman. She claimed to be a psychiatrist. Her name was Marie, and she was eager to know about my personal life. "I can help you if you wish to improve your mental health," she said. I thought it was great. We exchanged numbers and agreed to meet. Of course, because of the quarantine, it couldn't be at a public place, so I invited Marie to my home, giving her my address. "Welcome, Marie. My apartment's a bit of a mess, but single guy spending too much time home alone. Since you're a psychiatrist, I'm sure you know how it works," I said, being sincere, but also trying to break the ice.
Hello, Peter. It's not that bad, don't worry. Plus, I think a man in your situation, if he has his house too organized and clean, it's probably not a good sign.
Male loners who are like that, they often have some psychopathic personality traits and crave control. Many times they're also struggling with their own inner demons. Serial killers like Jeffrey Dahmer are good examples. When the police broke into his place, they noticed how tidy his house was. Even his fish aquarium was perfectly clean. At the same time, he had pieces of his victims inside his fridge and Polaroid pictures of his gruesome crimes kept inside a drawer. So, as you see, it's fine, Marie said. I offered her some coffee, which she gladly accepted. We had a nice chat about mental health in general, and I spoke to her about my doubts and fears. She said she also lived alone. Marie was about 50 years old, but she was passionate about her work as a psychiatrist, and the internet allowed her to keep working with her patients. Then, after a while, the conversation started to become a little weird.
Peter, let's do an exercise. Look into my eyes. Don't worry, I'm not pulling off anything romantic. It's an experiment, so I can test your mental strength. It's really very simple, Marie explained. Now, since it wasn't anything bizarre, I decided to play along. At best, I could either find it funny, but as I kept looking at her and listening to her soft voice, I started to feel strange. It wasn't unpleasant, but I felt like my mind was drifting away from my body. I heard her speaking words in a language that I didn't know. Or at least that's what I thought, since I wasn't understanding them. Then she said to me, "Take off your We're going to get cozy. I find you very attractive." I didn't feel the same about her by any means, and so I wanted to refuse her proposal. But in panic, I realized I wasn't controlling my body anymore. Not even my speech, since I wanted to speak, but wasn't able to. Terrified, I felt like I was inside someone else's body, because in practical terms, I was doing exactly what Marie told me to. I can't really describe what happened in the next few minutes. Marie had her fun and did all she wanted to do to me. Then she put her on and told me to do the same, which I did. She lit a cigarette and smoked it, always looking at me with her big, eerie, creepy, but irresistible dark eyes. She took her time,
and then asked me for all the information concerning my online bank accounts and credit cards. This time I was able to talk, but I was speaking what she wanted and not what I wished. Completely hopeless through the internet, I transferred all my money to her. She made me do the transaction via multiple Bitcoin wallets so that the final recipient wouldn't be tracked.
You will only awake from your trance after 1 week. By that time, I will be gone. You will never be able to find me, Peter. I can't erase your memory, but it's a big world out there. And my Omegle account will be shut down as well. Besides being a psychiatrist, I'm also a skilled hypnotist. When I find a man who pleases me, I do what I have to do. I fulfill all my needs. Nothing personal against you, my dear. It's just my nature. You are a smart and strong man, even if a bit too trusty. You will be able to make more money. I'm sorry. Goodbye now.
And just like that, she simply left my house. A couple of days later, I heard my cell phone ringing. Marie, or whatever her real name was right. I couldn't move. Fortunately, the next day I heard someone knocking on my apartment's door. It was my brother, Chad. "Hey, Pete, are you there? You didn't answer your cell phone yesterday. I was worried," he shouted. Then my cell phone started to ring once again. "I can hear your cell phone ring inside your apartment. Pete, I'm breaking in. I need to know if you're all right," my brother said. He was a strong dude, unlike my lock, and he broke in within a couple of minutes. "Pete, what the hell happened to you? Can't you move?" Obviously, I couldn't. Not even speak. Yet my eyes were moving, and I could see and hear. He took me to the hospital, and for the next 4 days there was nothing they could do to bring me back, so to speak. Doctors kept me under observation, but they were completely puzzled and didn't know what was going on. I couldn't blame them. Then, as Marie promised, I slowly recovered the control of my body. I explained to the doctors, nurses, and also to my brother, who kept visiting me every day, what had happened. "That is unbelievable," Chad said. "Well, believe it. And she left me with no money. I just hope I didn't catch any disease from her," I replied. For the next couple of weeks, my brother allowed me to stay with him and his wife. I borrowed some money from him, and as time went by, the quarantine was over, and I got a job as a cook. It'll take a long time before I can trust anyone again, especially a woman. I have a friend I once met on TikTok. He had the same vibes as mine, and I enjoyed watching his videos as much as I enjoyed creating mine. We soon got talking and formed a bond. It came as a pleasant surprise when I found out that we lived in the same neighborhood. It happened that there was a fire outbreak in my neighborhood, and I rushed out to capture the content for my followers. He must have gone out to make the same live video because while we were recording, we bumped into each other, and our focus shifted from the live video to each other. I was elated to see him, and it brought great joy to my heart that he was elated to see me, too. We completed the video together and hung out that night. Getting to know each other wasn't a hassle. We spent hours outside talking about random things, our likes and dislikes, and most importantly, how we ended up creating content on TikTok. When we each returned to our houses, an unbreakable bond was formed. Soon we started creating content together, and it became a friendship I didn't want to lose. We didn't just create content, we committed to doing live videos together too. Our fan base increased, and people knew us as always being together. The only thing that divided us was the school we attended. We weren't in the same high school, but it didn't matter. We had the rest of the day and the weekend to ourselves. However, one day, during one of our usual live sessions, a viewer started a fight with us. He didn't agree with one or two of the things we said, and we got into a heated argument. If he said a word, we attacked with two, so on and so forth. We eventually ended the live session when the viewer threatened to see the end of both of us. It didn't make sense that what we created to bring fun to the people was causing a lot of trouble to one douchebag. We didn't end the video because we got scared, we just thought it was best to avoid the tantrums of such a person and risk losing the rest of our fans. Although we were hurt by the occurrences of the day, we chose to ignore the fight and move on like it never happened. Life continued for us as usual. Well, that was until life decided to take a new turn. One afternoon after school, I was walking back to my home. I thought at first that I was hallucinating, but it was impossible to conclude that the human in a black hoodie wasn't looking for me. I was scared and hoped that it didn't mean anything. I sincerely hoped that I was imagining it. I walked cautiously out of that area and made sure that I didn't leave the confines of my mates. But it wasn't long before everyone dispersed. Some into cars, others onto different routes. Soon I was left alone. I could still sense that someone was watching me. And when I went down a few blocks, I caught sight of the hoodie again. The man was still following me, or so it seemed. That counted as the only plausible explanation for seeing him again. With a few tricks I learned from movies, I tried to lose the person. After a few more blocks, the strange sensation was gone, and I believed that I was freed from the pair of eyes that were watching my every move. Later in the evening, my TikTok friend came over as usual. I had forgotten all about the black hoodie guy that followed me, until he mentioned it too. We encountered the same thing after school, but managed to shake the stranger off. It became easy for us to conclude that we were being watched. But since we didn't have a way to prove it, we chose to keep silent about the occurrence and watch for evidence or be careful next time. My friend suggested that we monitor things carefully from now on. We were glad that the hooded man didn't follow us home, at least. It was a Saturday, and I was in my room listening to music and also drafting out the new idea I had for some new content on TikTok. Hunger gripped me in full force while I was at it, and I decided to grab some snacks from the kitchen. On my way to the kitchen, just at the entrance, I came across a footprint. The one sole footprint remained in its position, not preceded by any, not succeeded by any. A strange feeling captured me. But seeing as I had no way to solve the problem or understand the mystery, I decided to leave it as it is. I walked to the fridge, took some drinks, and turned to leave when I heard the creaking of my wooden veranda. I peeked through the window, but I saw no one or human form. However, I still heard sounds that confirmed the presence of someone on the veranda. I picked up the nearest knife to me and moved stealthily towards the direction of the sound. The cat jumped out of fright, and I jumped too, but I reclaimed my composure immediately. I was glad that the sound wasn't that of a human. I breathed a sigh of relief, but jumped again when I turned, and my friend was behind me. I asked how he got in, and he claimed he walked in from the back door because he found it open. I nodded in response, and the two of us went into my room. In a matter of time, night fell. We were still in my room when intuition caused me to look outside my window. I could taste the fear I felt in my mouth. The hooded guy stood right outside my window with an axe in his hand. Quickly, I told my friend to get us live on TikTok to the oblivion of the hooded guy. He set the camera in place, but while he did that, the man found his way into the house. Luckily, I had the knife I took in the kitchen earlier. When he attacked, I attacked too. I made sure to see that my friend was recording. He set the camera in place as we tried to fight for our lives. In the process, we mentioned our street and neighborhood, hoping that one of the viewers would recognize that we weren't putting on a show, but were in real danger. As I fought the man and dodged the axe in his hand, the fear of death encapsulated me. I didn't know how long we would last in that room, but then, when I heard the sound of sirens some moment later, joy swelled within me. The man tried to escape, but it wasn't possible. The police officers came and made the arrest. My friend and I were glad to be free from the stalker and potential murderer. We also thanked our audience and followers for helping us out in the time of danger. After that encounter, my friend and I made sure that we never got into a fight on TikTok ever again.
My roommate moved out in January, and I'd been looking for her replacement ever since. I live in the LA metro area, so I had assumed I'd be able to raise the rent just a bit, even though I'm not in the nicest neighborhood. I figured I'd be able to find someone pretty quickly, but after 2 months, I still hadn't found anyone who would be interested in renting the room. I'd tried practically everything, but I hadn't used Craigslist. Honestly, I'd completely forgotten that Craigslist even existed. Beggars can't be choosers, of course, and I really needed the money. So I uploaded a few pictures of the apartment and added a post in the Housing Wanted section. Honestly, it took me no more than 10 minutes. I had no idea how that single post would change my life forever. In less than an hour, I got my first response. A message came in from a man who introduced himself as Johnny. I'd never had a male roommate before, but his message seemed really nice. More importantly, he agreed to the full amount. So after a short exchange, I gave him the address and invited him to come over. He arrived right on time, which I took as a good sign. My first impression was that he was an artsy hipster type. He even had a goatee. He was extremely handsome and very polite. I invited him inside and gave him a quick tour of the place. He stopped in the kitchen and asked if there was anything off limits. I explained that he couldn't eat my food, but the appliances and utensils were free to use. I had a block of high-end knives left by my last roommate, a chef. He stopped in front of them and pulled out the biggest knife. "Including these?" he asked. "Sure, of course," I said. He smiled and slid the knife back into its slot. I didn't think anything of it at the time, but the look on his face as he held that knife should have been my first warning. Johnny moved in that weekend, and we had our first dinner together. We talked about movies and TV, just unimportant stuff. It seemed like we had a lot of things in common, though. I had a good feeling about him. After about a week of him living there, we got pretty close. We usually ate meals together and watched Netflix. Then one night, right after I came home from work, he said, "Hey, Melon, how was your day?" I started to answer, but the words caught in my throat. It took me a few seconds to register that he'd called me Melon. That was my childhood nickname, but no one had called me that since 3rd grade. How could Johnny have known? "What did you call me?" I asked. "Madison," he said. "That's your name, right?" But I knew what I heard. I looked into his eyes very closely. Did he look familiar at all? Had I ever met him before? Was he some long-ago classmate that I'd forgotten about? No, he didn't look familiar. And that name, Johnny, I didn't remember any Johnnies in my elementary school. He smiled and told me that he'd already cooked us dinner. I shook the doubts out of my head and sat down to eat. He told me some stories about his work, and I very quickly forgot about the weirdness. But then, as I was doing the dishes, I looked over and saw Johnny watching me. He pulled at the hair behind his ear, and I instantly recognized that gesture. There was a boy in my 1st grade class who used to do that, Jonathan Mayers. He was from a poor family, and he often came to school with dirty clothes. Back then, all the kids had been really mean to him, me included. "Are you Jonathan Mayers?" I asked him. A sad smile stretched across his face. "You finally remember," he said. "Why didn't you say something?" I asked. He laughed. Like his smile, it was cold. "Do you remember the teddy bear?" he asked. I shook my head. I had no idea what he was talking about. "The teddy bear!" he started to scream. "The navy blue teddy bear! Damn it, Madison! You have to remember that!" I tried really hard, but I still didn't know what he was talking about. "I gave it to you on Valentine's Day," he said. "1st grade, I saved up all my money just for you." "Oh," I said. "How sweet." He was still inching closer. "And do you remember what you said?" I honestly didn't. "You said I probably got it out of the dumpster," he screamed. "And you threw it out of the window. Of course you wouldn't remember that. Of course you wouldn't even recognize the boy that you terrorized for an entire year." He passed by the block of knives and casually pulled one out of its slot. "Johnny," I said, "what are you doing?" "When I showed up at your door and you didn't recognize me, I thought this would finally be my chance to get revenge. But then you were so nice to me, and I started to forget all that anger, all my years of therapy. I thought you'd changed. But nope, you're still the same selfish, conceited girl from elementary school. Put down the knife. I told him. He dove at me, an inhuman scream erupting from his mouth. He pushed me to the floor, and the back of my head struck the tile, hard. I tried to push him off of me, but he was too strong. He raised the knife. "You should have taken that stupid teddy bear," he screamed, and plunged the knife down. I twisted to the side and raced out of the apartment. I ran until I got to the Walgreens down the street. I didn't have my phone with me, but the worker there could tell I was in shock. She helped me call 911. I waited there for the police, and together we went back to the apartment. When we got there, Johnny was gone. He'd taken all his stuff. The only sign that he'd ever been there was his empty dinner plate and the knife that he'd left lying on the floor. It's been 2 weeks now, and I still haven't heard anything. No one can find Johnny, but I know he's still out there. He's probably still thinking of me, still plotting his revenge. I can't sleep. I can't eat. All I can do is worry that one day Johnny will show up at my door again. I'd forgotten him after first grade, but I'll never forget him now.
I'd just gotten out of nursing school this spring, excited to start my first job at the small hospital just outside of our town. I lived in a very rural area in northern Arizona, so the hospital was usually pretty quiet, especially at night. As the new nurse on duty, I often had to take the night shift. I never had a problem with it. In fact, I enjoyed the peace and quiet, and the patients who were awake at those hours often had some interesting stories to tell. It really was a good gig. At least, that's what I thought. I had no idea that this night would be the very last night I worked at this place. I had just clocked in, and the head nurse, Margaret, filled me in on the patients. There were only 3 of them that night, all recovering from post-op. I made my rounds as usual, introducing myself to each of the patients. One was an older man who'd gotten his hip replaced. The second was a middle-aged woman who was so looped out on pain meds that she barely acknowledged me. They both seemed normal, business as usual. When I got to the third patient, a younger man named Paul who'd just gotten his tonsils out, I started getting a strange feeling. Paul seemed nice and everything. He asked for a popsicle, but otherwise seemed to be friendly and low maintenance. But there was just something about him, something that made me distrust him instantly. By about 2 in the morning, I looked around for Margaret, but she wasn't there. She must have been on her break. By then, the first 2 patients were asleep, but I could still hear Paul in his room singing quietly to himself. It sounded like some old folk song from centuries ago, the kind of song that a young person like Paul would never sing. I entered his room to see how he was doing. Paul sat on his bed. I tried to tell him that he needed to lie back down, but he just ignored me. He kept on singing, looking straight into the shadowy corner of the room. I figured he hadn't heard me, but he really needed to get some sleep, so I walked over and I gently placed my hand on his shoulder. Still not turning towards me, he whispered, "Just let me finish singing her this song, okay? I'm almost done." "Her?" I asked. There was no one else in the room. "Her," he said, pointing toward the dark, empty corner. Through my training, I knew that if patients ever showed signs of psychosis, I'd need to report to the doctor so that he could handle it. But there weren't any doctors here, and I didn't know where our head nurse was. I'd have to deal with this myself. Figured I had to be as gentle as possible. "And what song are you singing?" I asked. He turned to look at me now, and I could see that his eyes were unfocused. I knew he was on some heavy pain medicine, but those eyes didn't look like they were sleepy. They looked unhinged. "It's the song she heard on the day she died," he said. I very quickly pulled my hand away from his shoulder. I had no idea what to tell him, but I knew I wasn't equipped to handle something like this. I needed to get out of that room and talk to Margaret. "Okay," I said. "I'll let you get back to your song, but after that, you really should get some rest." He giggled. I started backing out of the room, looking at the patient and the shadowy corner. Before I left, though, I realized that there was something strange in that room.
The corner was covered in a shadow, but I couldn't tell where the shadow came from. The lights were in the center of the ceiling, but there weren't any objects nearby to cast a shadow like that. And then I saw the shadow move. It expanded, its edges becoming clearer, and I swear to you that it looked like the outline of a person sitting cross-legged on the floor. I ran out of there as fast as I could. Margaret was back at the front desk, casually scrolling through her phone. She looked up at me, slightly annoyed at the interruption, and asked if everything was okay. I couldn't tell her that I'd seen a shadow because she would have thought I was crazy. Instead, I told her that Paul was showing signs of psychosis and I wanted her to check on him. She huffed loudly. "I'll be right back," she said, and trudged towards Paul's room. I could still hear the faint echoes of Paul's song. I waited in the empty main room while Margaret dealt with the patient. My heart was racing, and I felt like a total idiot for getting scared about nothing. Paul was just a normal guy on some medication. The shadow was just a shadow. There was absolutely nothing wrong in that room. Then I heard a single scream, Margaret's, and I ran back toward the door. I paused outside for a few seconds, struggling to keep my emotions in check, and I slowly entered the room. Paul was still sitting on his bed. His song was over, and he just stayed there, quiet and motionless. I couldn't see his face because he was still staring at the corner. I didn't see Margaret anywhere. "Paul?" I said, slowly approaching. "Paul, is everything okay?" "Yes," he said without turning. As I got closer, I saw that the shadow had darkened even more. Its outline was more defined. This was clearly the shape of a person. I could see shoulders and arms and long hair. This was the shadow of a woman. It didn't move. "Paul?" I asked. "Where's Margaret?" He didn't understand. "The nurse who just came in here?" I clarified. "Oh," he said. "Well, my song ended. And after I finish my song, she always gets a little hungry." Hungry? What the hell did he mean? I knew he was talking about the shadow, or whatever it was he saw in the corner. How could a shadow be hungry? And where was Margaret? I could see his face now, completely blank. I looked around the room, but there was no sign that Margaret had been there at all. Everything was empty and sterile. That is, until I noticed something on the floor just in front of that shadow. It was a single shoe, a nurse's shoe, Margaret's shoe. And the shadow shifted again, as if it was leaning back against the wall. Then a single sound that came out of that shadow, one that I'll remember for the rest of my life. It was a burp.
My name is Matt, and I'm 48 years old. I used to be a plastic surgeon until recently. For some reason, since I was a teenager, I thought that the idea of being able to change people's appearances was both fascinating and artistic. Perhaps I also suffered from some kind of God complex deep inside my forbidden subconscious. But regardless, I always wanted to help people. Most of them just wanted to pursue some idea of vanity. Perhaps what they needed was mental therapy to improve their self-esteem and perception of the world, instead of simply having a nose job just because society tells them that small noses are better than big ones. I now understand that. But back then, I thought I was fixing them. But not all the cases were that superficial. Quite the opposite. I was also involved in reconstructing faces and other parts of the bodies of people who suffered terrible and disfiguring accidents. From car crashes to war injuries, and even victims of gruesome and traumatizing crimes. I once had a patient, a man, whose ex-wife threw a chemical solution which caused burns to his face. With the help of my assistants and nurses, after 1 year of complex surgeries, my team was able to reconstruct his face up to 95%. The man was very pleased and immensely happy with the results, and very thankful. This is one of those significant episodes that will forever make me proud. As for my personal life, I got married when I was in my early 30s. My wife's name was Meredith. The first couple of years were great. Unfortunately, as time went by, Meredith, ironically, started to develop a fixation about how she wanted her face to look. "Please, Matt, I want you to enhance my lips. I just need them a little bit bigger. Sexier, just like Angelina Jolie," she said to me once. "Honey, you are perfect as you are. Don't start obsessing over your appearance. Where does that come from?" "I shouldn't talk about my work. It's a negative influence," I answered. "No, it's not your fault, Matt. I want to do it for myself," Meredith insisted. "Absolutely not. I will not do it. Let's not discuss it anymore, please," I replied, almost angry. As weeks went by, this became my reaction to Meredith's complaints and her fantasies about a plastic surgery. I shouldn't have been so defensive, because one day, I got a call from Meredith's brother, Jeff. "Matt, it's Jeff. Something happened to my sister." "What? Is she all right?" I asked in a panic. "Not really, no. She's at the hospital. One specific hospital, to be more precise." "Is she hurt? An accident? Tell me, Jeff!" "She is alive, and she isn't in danger, but I think you better come and see for yourself. I'll give you the hospital's address," Jeff said. I went as fast as I could. I knew that hospital. It was actually a clinic which specialized in plastic surgery. I guess you could say they were a part of my competition, but they were far from being the best. I immediately realized what was going on. I met Jeff inside the clinic, and he confirmed my deepest fears. "Meredith had a surgery. I know you were against that, and you were definitely right, but you know my sister, stubborn. Unfortunately, it didn't go so well. They genuinely ruined her lips. She looks like the Joker, the villain from Batman." "I'm sorry for being so blunt, but it is what it is," Jeff explained. "Oh no. Can I see her?" "I suppose so. She doesn't want to be seen, though. Especially by you, Matt." "I don't care. Take me to her room, Jeff, now!" "Okay, follow me." When I entered Meredith's room, she was crying. "Matt, don't look at me! I'm hideous!" And in fact, she was. But I didn't tell her that, of course. "Don't worry, I will fix this, and we will sue these butchers. I will not rest until their licenses are taken away, and they will pay us for all the damages, including psychological ones. I will get us the best lawyers," I said to Meredith as I hugged her. "You were right. I'm so sorry, Matt. Forgive me. I don't know what was going on in my head. Too much social media, I guess. That's what happens when people who don't work have too much free time on their hands. My sins are sloth and vanity," Meredith said. "Well, at least you were over that crazy idea of wanting to change your face." "I'll fix it, with my own hands and my own clinic," I said to Meredith. I did my best, but it was simply not possible to give my wife her original appearance back. She looked better, but not like her previous self. As months went by, Meredith became very depressed. She started drinking, and sometimes she even went out alone without telling me. Went to bars because she didn't want to drink at home. She was embarrassed and was ashamed of herself. One night, I got a call from the police. Meredith had died in a car crash. She was completely drunk. Her face was completely disfigured because of the accident. It's scary how things turn out sometimes. Like everything has a meaning or a message. I was devastated. During the first couple of months, I had terrible nightmares. Meredith would appear in front of me. Her face would be grotesque, like a monster. During one of those dreams, she tried to come close to me and wanted to make love, but even her body was hideous. "What's the matter, Matt? I'm not good enough for you anymore," she said during that nightmare. I woke up covered in sweat in the middle of the night. I can't take this anymore. I'm going insane. I can't fix death. And what happened?" I said to myself. I tried to turn the lights of my bedroom on, but they were not responding. I got up from my bed and soon realized that there was no electricity in the house. But then I saw an eerie light coming from the living room. It was dark yellow. I went in to see what was producing such light. I couldn't believe what I saw. Meredith? Is that you? The light had the shape and facial features of my dead wife, her original features. Yes, Matt, it's me. I'm at peace now. But I do want to ask you something. I want you to abandon your career as a surgeon and dedicate yourself to conventional medicine. It's the only way you can overcome the trauma of losing me. With time, you'll also feel better about yourself. I have to go now. Goodbye, Meredith's ghost said. And then she simply vanished in the thin air. I can't really say if it was a dream or not, but I did follow that advice. I now work at a clinic where I practice general and conventional medicine. The nightmares have stopped, although I will never truly accept what happened to Meredith. But at least I found some peace in my head by helping common people who just want to be healthy and be cured from their pain.
The day Perry, my closest friend, asked if I knew Death's Play on Twitter, I should have shut him up, looked away, and never talked about it again. Although I did shut him up and looked away, like a fool, I asked him about it later that day. I wasn't much of a Twitter user because I thought that only loners used the app. I didn't like the energy, the competition, the viciousness, and other things that ensued on the app, so I stayed away from it. But Perry, he loved the app so much, I was tempted sometimes. He spent hours surfing through the app, looking for threads and narrating them all to me whenever he had time to spare. I thought Death's Play, or whatever he called it, was just like one of his little discoveries. Curiosity finally got the best of me, and I told him to tell me what he meant by it. I didn't know what I was expecting, but it wasn't exactly what he said. He was quickly elated to tell me all about the new account, Death's Play. The account played out just like its name. No one knew the handler or who was behind the hosts, but everyone had a good time reading thread after thread of funny ways that some people lost their lives. Death's Play, indeed. It sounded surreal, and it didn't exactly pass as something a sane person was supposed to read, but the idea of the account ignited butterflies in my stomach. When Perry told me to download the Twitter app, I did so without any second thoughts. I registered on the app, created a weird username, and followed the account Perry introduced to me. I didn't follow any other account, even Perry's, because it didn't take long before I got engrossed in the stories. The more I read, the darker they were, and the more excited I was. I got to meet many more people like myself, people that love the idea of funny deaths. They started to make suggestions in the comment boxes. Or there were already many suggestions before I joined. One suggested that the account owner write a story about someone who died by lighting a fire on his toes. Another person suggested that the account owner write about someone who drowned in toilet water. The comments and suggestions were as funny as the stories. I couldn't help but be thankful to Perry in my heart for introducing me to the account. We were indeed birds of the same feather. Our likes were the common ground that brought us together. Life took a new turn, and I took pleasure in using the app every day. Would have been hard to convince anyone that I didn't use Twitter before that time. Sometime later, Perry and I also added our suggestions in one of the comment sections of a particular thread. Perry suggested that the owner write a thread about someone who vomited to death. It sounded gross, but the idea caused a sort of adrenaline to rush through me in expectation. It wasn't long before I made my suggestion and asked the man to write a story about someone who closed the door of the elevator on his hand and rode to his death. I knew it sounded cruel, but it didn't mean that the owner of Death's Play couldn't make something funny out of it. Perry and I earnestly waited for the day that our suggestions would make it to the threads. 2 weeks later, Perry and I prayed hard that our suggestions would never make it. We deleted comments and unfollowed the account. Our decision stemmed from some news that we saw. The threads on Death's Play were no comedy or a way of relieving pain. They were actual ways that some people died. Now, it would have been okay if those deaths were random, but they weren't. The ones who suffered the deaths we read were the people who made the suggestion. The first news came on the television where we heard that some man drowned himself to death in the toilet. That seemed casual, but when we listened to the full story and noticed that it matched exactly with the thread we read a few days before, we knew something was wrong. We tried to search for the thread and the person who suggested it. We were not surprised, but still horrified that his family members had tagged his account as dead. He was the same person that died by drowning. We made further findings and began to match all the deaths on Death's Plays threads to the deaths of the ones who made the suggestions. They were all alike. Fear gripped me, and I knew it was the same with Perry. That was when we deleted our comments and unfollowed the account. Sadly, it wasn't enough. Perry died a week later. The death of Perry scared me, and I almost thought I would die from the sight I saw. Earlier that day, I left the house to get some supplies for the week. Since we didn't have a Twitter account to keep us busy anymore, we had to find actual work and actual fun. And that included cooking. I went to the mall to get some vegetables. I tried as much as possible not to stay out too late, but that didn't matter. When I got back home, Perry was lying in a pool of vomit. I called the ambulance and they came for him, but there was nothing they could do. I lost my friend. Anger and fear surged through me at the announcement, and I found myself in Death's Play account once again. I read the thread that the owner wrote on Perry's suggestion and knew without a doubt that the man, or whoever it was, killed the victims himself. I wondered about what to do. To expose the man on the internet or report him? Whatever I did, I avoided elevators at all costs. After Perry's burial, I decided the best thing to do was report the man to the right authorities to get him arrested. Otherwise, death would come for me, too. I went to the police station, submitted my report, and showed them evidence. They took my report into account, and when they asked me to be their bait, I agreed. If it meant avenging my best friend's death, I was willing to risk my life. The opportunity to take the elevator came one day. I was in a hotel lobby and I had to reach the 10th floor where I had a meeting with a guy I met on a dating app. Unsurprisingly, one of the staff in the lobby motioned me towards the lift. My guts told me it was the killer himself. I took the elevator that he suggested and the man boarded after me. Thankfully, I had informed the detectives beforehand. The elevator stopped and opened on the first floor, and the two officers swarmed in and arrested the guy. That's how I was rescued from the hands of death. The truth of Death's Play came to life, as well as the lives that were lost due to his silly game and the urge to garner influence. I sometimes wish I'd planned all this before Perry died.
I'm 43 years old. So obviously, I don't have TikTok on my phone. I think it's one of the stupidest things on the internet. I mean, I understand the use of Instagram and Facebook, because you can chat with people and share stories. But TikTok just didn't make sense to me. I didn't even know that my daughter was on it until last week, when she asked if I'd like to be in one of her videos. At first, I was reluctant, but then I agreed. Barca had been pulling away from me lately. You know how teens are. Her mom had passed away about a year ago, and I think she was still angry at me for starting to go on dates again. She never said that, but I could tell. So I thought that if we could bond over something like this, it might take away some of the awkwardness between us. She taught me a 15-second dance, which was mostly just swaying and clapping. She filmed us doing it together, one take, then ran into her room to upload. The next day, she told me that we'd gotten a couple thousand views, which I thought was good. After that, she started filling me in on more of her videos. I tried to act interested, even though I still thought that whole thing was stupid. She mostly did dances and lip syncs and reaction stuff. She had me help her out with a few of them, including one video where she had me balance a water bottle on my head. It all felt so harmless. And I guess the newest videos were doing well, because she kept telling me about the number of views that she was getting. Those numbers kept going up. Then yesterday, She told me that she wanted to respond to one of those TikTok challenges, like when people eat oranges in the shower or whatever. She asked if I wanted to help. I heard about some of those challenges being kind of dangerous, so I said that she had to tell me what it was first. I can't, she said. It has to be a surprise. I really wanted to say no, but as a single father of a teen girl who would barely answer me when I asked her a question, I was starting to feel like we were finally bonding over something. I couldn't say no. Awesome, she said. Sit right here. She guided me towards our living room sofa and sat me down. Then she pulled out a bandana and blindfolded me. I don't like this, I told her. It's okay, she said. Just sit here and wait, and no peeking. I heard her giggling as she ran out of the room. It reminded me of when Becca was 3 years old before her mom died. She would play hide and seek for hours, and she giggled the whole time. She was the world's worst hider, which made the whole thing so much fun. I missed that time, back when things were simpler. I gladly waited. But when Becca didn't come back, I started to get a bit frustrated. Maybe this was the challenge. Maybe she just wanted to blindfold her dad with no intention of returning and wait to see how long it would take for me to give up. That seemed a little mean, but I wouldn't put it past her. After all, she'd said some pretty angry things to me in the past, mostly about dating again and abandoning her mom. I reached up and pulled out my bandana just a little bit to peek out. At first, all I saw was her phone sitting on the mantel, aimed right at me. She was filming. Then I saw a shape in the corner of my eye. It was Becca, but I couldn't see what she was doing. No peeking, she said again. How long do I have to wait? I asked. Almost ready, she said. She giggled again. I let the bandana fall back over my eyes and waited some more. I could hear her in the corner of the room. She was shuffling around with something. It sounded metallic. I assumed she was going to try to scare me. That had to be it, right? She was going to ask me to take off my blindfold and then jump at me with a mask on. Something like that. I don't get scared easily, so I figured I'd have to pretend. If that was what my little girl wanted, I could do that. She kept banging around in the corner of the room. I heard her drop something heavy onto the floor. What the heck was she doing? I heard a soft moaning too, but it didn't sound like Becca. I couldn't wait any longer, so I pulled off the bandana. Instantly, bile rose up in the back of my throat, and I felt like I was going to throw up. Daddy, Becca screamed. Not yet. She stood over a body that was tied up with rope and duct tape. It was a woman, her long hair covering her face. I jumped off the sofa and ran to her. Come on, Daddy, Becca said. You're ruining the challenge. She had a butcher knife in her hand. The body twisted to the side, revealing her face. Her mouth was covered in duct tape, but I recognized her right away. This was Samantha, the woman I'd gone out to dinner with last week. We just had a single date and it hadn't worked out. I never expected to see her again, especially not like this. Becca, I said, slowly walking closer. What are you doing? It's the latest challenge, she said. The Kill the challenge. Everybody's doing it. I'll never forget the look in my daughter's eyes. She was unhinged, unrecognizable. Put the knife down, I told her. She glanced at the camera on the mantel, gave it a quick wink, and then said, gladly. And with that, she slammed the knife down. She would have stabbed that woman right in the chest, but I dove forward and blocked her. Instead, the knife went right into my back. Searing pain surged through me. Becca pulled out the knife. Daddy, she said, you're ruining the challenge. I'll have to start again. When Becca was growing up, her mother and I refused to spank her. We were always patient and understanding, but now I couldn't let her get away with this. I jumped up and grabbed her by the shoulders. I pushed her into the bathroom, blocked the door with a chair, and called the police. I untied Samantha, who explained that Becca had used my phone to lure her here. I'm not sure if she's going to sue us over this. Probably. Becca is at the hospital now, being looked after by psychiatrists and professionals. I'm not sure how long they'll keep her there, but at least she won't have a phone. At least she won't have TikTok.
My name is Sean, and I'm 28 years old. A few months ago, I was checking out Craigslist, and I saw a really nice cell phone, an even nicer price. I contacted the seller immediately, and we arranged a meeting. The transaction was very fast. We met at a particular street. The guy who sold it to me was about 40 years old. Pretty normal and average-looking guy. He was polite and allowed me to test the phone. It was working perfectly, and although it was used, it looked brand new. "Thanks, I'm glad I got this. Great deal," I said as I left. "Thank you. Take care," the man replied as we shook hands like two gentlemen who sealed a business deal. I live with my girlfriend Doris. One night as we were sleeping, my new phone started to ring. It was 3 a.m. Damn, who could that be? "Hello?" I mumbled, still cranky from being awakened by the noise, answering the call but trying to snap out of my sleep. At first, there was no answer from the other side, but then a strange noise was produced, and after that, a scream. So loud that I actually dropped the phone, being caught by surprise. What the hell? I picked up the phone again, but the call had been terminated. "Who was that?" my girlfriend asked. I don't know. I got a call from an unknown number. I heard a piercing scream and I got scared. I don't know, probably a stupid prank. I'm going back to sleep," I said to Doris. "Yeah, we should just turn off our phones while we're in bed, Sean. People are allowed to rest." Agreed. Everything was normal after that eventful night. I took my girlfriend's advice, and anytime we wanted to be alone, we just turned our phones off. I didn't even take it to the bedroom anymore. Instead, I just placed it on a shelf in the living room. Yet, one night, the cell phone rang once again. I looked at my watch and realized that it was precisely the same hour as last time, as the same anonymous call at 3 a.m. This time, I was home alone, since my girlfriend was visiting her sister for the weekend. It was Saturday night, and I was genuinely freaked out. I went to the living room and picked up the phone. Again, it was an unknown number. I wasn't very hopeful about getting a proper answer, but still. "Hello? Who is this?" I asked. Someone was speaking at the other end, but the words were very distorted. It sounded like someone was in fear. I felt a sense of dread and terror from the other side. "I don't understand. I can't hear you properly. Please speak loudly," I asked, feeling a natural instinct of solidarity, as if that person needed my help. The person spoke again and again, repeated the same thing. It was an address. I wrote it down. "What do you want me to do?" I asked, with my hands shaking. I got a simple answer, coming from the distortion and the feeble voice. "Search underground." After hearing these words, the phone call was ended. "This is just too weird," I said to myself as I sat down on the couch. I kept looking at the address, and it was from a town not far away from where I lived, probably an hour's drive. I got dressed and had a cup of coffee. You might call me stupid, but I'm a very inquisitive person, so I knew I had to go visit that address. I couldn't just wait. It was like my sixth sense was in control now. I drove there as fast as I could, and within 45 minutes, I arrived. It was a big house in a very quiet and small street. There were other houses nearby, but they appeared to be abandoned. But not from the one address. There was a car parked inside the garage, and I could see lights on inside the house. It was now 5 a.m. Okay, I'm here. Now what? I said to myself, trying to think before remembering the additional words from the voice. Search underground. There was a big garden attached to the property. That was a start. Suddenly, I got a text message from an unknown number. The words said, "Dig. Behind the garage. You'll find a shovel inside." I climbed the wall and was now inside the property. I followed the instructions of the eerie anonymous text. Trying to be as silent as possible, I picked up the shovel, which was indeed inside the garage, and now I was digging behind it. After a while, I found something. A human head, still composing. I couldn't help but scream. Bad idea. Within seconds, someone came from inside the house. "Hey, who's there? What are you doing? Come here!" A man screamed, and I was surprised to see that it was precisely the man who sold me the cell phone. I was now running like hell towards my car. Another individual appeared from the house. I was now being chased by both of them. Fortunately, I was empowered by the adrenaline. Plus, I still managed to throw the shovel at them, which at least forced them to stop, avoiding being hit. I drove back as fast as I could, parking near the closest police station, and as expected, my chasers didn't follow me. I ran inside the police station and explained everything. The corpse buried in the garden, and the men who lived in the house who tried to stop me from revealing my findings. Within hours, the police captured the men. They were criminals, robbers and murderers, organized and experienced. The cell phone that I bought from one of them was a stolen item, and I was shocked to know that the person that I found dead, buried, was actually the owner of the same cell phone, a woman named Monica. I returned the cell phone to the police, of course. As for those mysterious phone calls and the text message, I guess I'll never know for sure who it was. But given all the circumstances in which those contacts happened, I do believe that it was Monica's spirit before crossing over, trying to warn me about the killers, so that Monica could have peace. Growing up in a Mormon household, I'd always been unable to do a lot of stuff that other teens were able to do. I didn't go to parties or sneak sips of alcohol. I didn't date, aside from replanned get-togethers with my parents there. Worst of all, I didn't use any kind of social media. Mom said that the internet was full of crazy people. She said that life was too short for me to waste my time making fake friends online. And for the longest time, I believed her. But I'm 18 now, and I don't have to do everything my parents say. I'm studying at BYU, and while I'm making friends with people who aren't part of the church, I still want to dip my toes into the online world. I knew that if I got an Instagram or a Facebook account, my parents would find out right away. My dorm mate told me about Omegle, which was completely anonymous, and I figured that I could give it a try. I didn't even need to create an account. All I had to do was log in and video chat with other people who I would never really meet in real life. What was the danger in that, right? It took me a second to figure out how it worked, but basically a video of someone would appear and we were able to chat about anything. It seemed cool, but as soon as I opened my mouth, those people took one look at me and skipped to someone else. I considered myself a pretty handsome guy, but I guess people can tell from my clothes and my face that I'm just some Mormon loser who has no idea how to use the internet. I spent about an hour trying to connect with people, but I always got skipped, over and over. It was extremely embarrassing, and even though I knew that those people would never see me again, I couldn't stop feeling sorry for myself. Eventually, I connected with a cute girl who didn't skip me immediately. She said hi and asked me a few questions about myself. She had fake red hair, but beautiful eyes. I felt a connection instantly. I even noticed that in the background to her video that she had a BYU pendant on the wall. She must go to my school. I didn't mention that though. I didn't want to scare her off. In fact, the brick wall behind her looked really familiar. I figured she'd stayed at Youngman Hall, which was just on the other side of campus. We chatted for a bit, and then her expression changed. She still smiled, but it seemed darker, more challenging. "You seem like a cool guy," she said. "Do you want to see something crazy?" I didn't answer for a second. Was she going to flash me or something? I didn't know if I was ready for that. But I couldn't say no, though, because I was worried that she'd get disappointed and skip me. So I said, "Sure." She giggled and then left the room. I waited for a long moment, preparing myself for whatever she was going to show me. And when she came back, she had a guy with her. It took me a second to realize that the guy was tied up. His mouth had duct tape on it. "Watch this," she said. "It's wild." She positioned the semi-conscious man on her lap. She pulled out a knife and held it up to the camera. She wiggled it right in front of my face, still smiling. I was so shocked I didn't say anything. I couldn't form any words at all. Then, with one more giggle, she stabbed into the man. He twitched in pain. I could hear his choking groans through the duct tape. She stabbed him more times than I could count, and the man kept twitching and writhing, thrashing about, until he became very still. Then, the girl turned back towards me. Her beautiful eyes locked onto mine. Crazy, right? And with that, the video stopped and ended our chat. The next video came on, an Asian man in a hoodie, and I was too numb to say anything. He stared at me for a second and then skipped me. I slammed my laptop shut. What just happened? Was something happening on social media? Was this the thing that my parents warned me about? I sat in my room for hours, staring at nothing, trying to figure out what I saw and if it was real or was it an online prank. I considered calling the police, but I couldn't. I had no idea what to say. I stayed in my room for the next few days, barely able to talk to my dorm mates. And as days went on, I tried to convince myself that I had just connected with a weird girl who just wanted to impress a total stranger with her stupid prank. After a while, I convinced myself that that was the case. It couldn't be real. Things like that don't happen in the real world. The next Monday, I went to my classes, finally happy that I had gotten past that one attempt at socializing online. I went to my literature class, which is in the lecture hall with hundreds of students. I took my usual seat by myself. I recognized fake red hair right away. I looked but looked away, trying not to look. But when she turned in my direction, her beautiful eyes locked onto mine, just like they had before. And I knew she recognized me. The room was huge, filled with chatter from every direction, but I could still hear her giggling. After that, I raced out of there, into the hallway filled with students rushing to get to their next class. I tried to blend in. I tried to make sure the girl didn't see me. I rounded the corner, and there she was, leaning casually against the wall. "Hi," she replied. I said nothing. "Do I know you?" she asked. She looked at me for a long time. I could tell that she was messing with me. I don't think so," I said. "No," she responded. "I know I've seen you somewhere, but I can't put my finger on it." She got closer. I was too scared to run. She was so close now that I could smell her minty breath. She leaned towards me and whispered into my ear. "Crazy, right?" Then she pulled back. "I have a feeling I'm going to be seeing you real soon." And then she walked away, and she was gone. It's been 2 weeks since that happened, and I haven't seen her since. But I think about her every day. And whenever I'm alone, I always look around to make sure she's not there. But in my heart, I know she's watching me. And I know one day, she'll come for me. I loved working at the old folks' home. It was sometimes stressful, and I really didn't like changing the bedpans. But most of my job was actually pretty fun. I had a real rapport with the old ladies here. They called me Howdy Doody because of my red hair, and a few of them even thought that I was their grandson, so they treated me extra nice. Unfortunately, they'd been understaffed lately, which meant that twice a week, I had to also work the night shift. I hated the night shift more than anything. I'd rather change 100 bedpans than to have to spend all night at that place. They kept all the lights off except a single lamp at the front desk, and all I had to do was sit there all night long, check the rooms every hour, and call an ambulance if there were any medical emergencies. It might not seem too bad, aside from the sheer boredom of it all, but you don't know what this place is like. It's creepy. I mean, I'm a brave guy. I took care of myself and everything, but when I'm at Sunny Glen after hours, I feel like I'm 6 years old again. The building is over 100 years old, so it's constantly creaking and setting. And since we are surrounded by forested area, I always see the silhouettes of animals walking through the windows. They're always out there, skittering around. Despite my nerves, I never really had a problem during the night shift until about a month ago. It was a Saturday, and I'd been called in last minute because my coworker Dan had just been fired for stealing medications. Things were normal at first. All of the residents had taken their meds and gone to sleep, and I was up at the front desk checking my phone. Out of nowhere, I heard a door slam. I ran over and saw Doris, one of our residents, standing in the hallway. She was trembling, and her eyes were wide. I approached slowly, afraid that she might do something to hurt herself. I asked her what was wrong, and she mumbled, "He's outside. He's after us." If this had happened during the daytime, I would have assumed that Doris was just having some dementia-related episode, but this was the night shift, and my heart started thudding in my chest. "Wait right here," I told her. I slowly walked into her room, staring out the window. A cluster of trees was right outside. I waited, watched, and jumped back when I saw a figure race through the shadows. It didn't look like an animal. It looked like a person. A man. I latched the lock on the window and then raced back into the hall. "Okay, I think I saw him," I told Doris. "Wait right here. I'm going to call the police." I started heading towards the front desk, but Doris grabbed me by the back of the shirt and pulled me backwards. She'd never done anything like that before. She was a kooky old lady, but she wasn't violent. "Doris," I told her, "let me grab the phone." Somehow she looked different than she had just a minute before. Something changed inside of her. With a surprising strength, she grabbed my shoulders and spun me around. Before I could do anything, I tried to gently push her away, but she wasn't stopping. I had to shove her back. She just laughed. I spun around and raced down the hall, but all around me, more doors opened. Greta, Maria, and Linda stumbled out of their rooms. They were all dressed in their pajamas, like Doris, but their eyes were wide and crazed. Greta grabbed my arm. I tried to keep going, but Maria stood in front of me, blocking my way. "Look, it's Howdy Doody," she screamed. More doors were opening, and more old women came out. Something was really wrong. What had gotten into all of them? I tried to walk around Maria, but she kept blocking me like some football player. Linda, a very large woman who had always been kind to me, wrapped her arms around and... "What are you doing?" "Come here, Howdy Doody," she said. "You know my husband was a redhead too." I pushed her against the wall and ran. I dove around Maria and made it out of the hallway just as more doors were opening. It seemed like all the residents were awake now, and they were all stumbling towards me. The whole building filled with their laughter. In seconds, I reached the front desk and grabbed my phone. With trembling fingers, I unlocked the screen and called 911. As it was ringing, I looked around. The women were still coming. I also noticed that the door to our medicine closet was wide open. Someone else was here. A police dispatcher answered, and I told her to send as many people as they had. She asked me about the nature of the emergency, but I didn't know how to say it. None of this made any sense. There's been an attack," I finally said, and hung up the phone. As the women kept giggling and walking towards me, I headed towards the medicine closet. Whoever was there, maybe they could explain what was going on. I could hear someone inside, rifling through the shelves. "Hello?" I said. Behind me, one of the women called out, "Hey, Howdy Doody, come over here." "Yeah, cutie," another one said. Whoever was in the closet froze in place. I could see his outline, but he wasn't moving. Then, slowly, he stepped into the light. "Dan?" I whispered. Dan was dressed in all black, a leaf stuck to his sweater. He must have snuck inside from out of the woods. He was the figure that Doris spotted earlier. He looked at me, his dark eyes angry, accusing. "You took it all," he said. "Took what?" "My personal stash," he said, as he held up an empty yellow pill bottle. I was confused. That wasn't his. That was the bottle of sleeping pills I had to give to all the residents. "Dan," I said slowly, "what are you doing here? You were fired." "Yeah," he said, "for switching out prescriptions, but it wasn't my fault. I just needed to make a little extra money. And now you," he stepped closer, "you wasted my whole stash." That's when I realized that the sleeping pills I'd given to all the ladies weren't really sleeping pills at all. They were something else, something Dan had been hiding. Oh God, all these women were high on those pills? "Dan, what was in the bottle?" He rattled off some medical name I didn't recognize, and when he saw that I didn't know what he was talking about, he added, "You know, Mexican love pills." And right as he said it, the women had reached us. I felt hands grab me in every direction. They were on me now, giggling, pulling at my shirt and hair. They were all so strong, even the ones propping themselves up on the walkers. Dan watched as I struggled to free myself. He waved once and ran towards the front door. He knew he was going to get away with it, to leave me here, but he wasn't looking where he was going, and collided with a policeman who had just walked inside. The cop grabbed Dan and cuffed him. The other officers came over and helped separate the mob. For the next few minutes, I watched as a flurry of policemen tried to calm down a bunch of elderly women who wouldn't stop. Eventually, the ambulance arrived and administered shots that seemed to counteract whatever medication they were all on. Dan, of course, was arrested, and thankfully none of our residents suffered any injuries from the chaos. I still work at Sunny Glen, but I told my boss from now on, I don't work the night shifts.
There was something strange about the man who sauntered into the Burger King in a long trench coat, which he shivered under. He was very tall, hunched over at the shoulders, and from the network of veins on the back of his hands, I could tell he was very lean. He had long, thin hair, and the frizzies fell on his face loosely, those sunken cheeks that gave him an unmistakable sober appearance. The weather was mostly warm, and from where I was seated, dining in my burger and soda, I can make out the strangeness of his quivering, because I would not assume he was so frail to be incapable of supporting his own weight. I swallowed that chewed piece of food I had in my mouth as I watched him. I had no other form of entertainment for my time and found him rather curious. He ambled to a seat and sat with both his hands on the table. The bleached skin of his face had a slight pink discoloration around his nose and mouth. His eyes were a dizzying gray pair, which stared blankly and did not roam like a conscious mind would. I was still intrigued by this man when his mouth began to move and my fascination deepened. It was something to behold. I reached over to my soda and slurped some to wash down the taste of food in my mouth. In that small moment that I peeled my gaze away from him, he was up on his feet. His movement was steady, almost as though he tried a stiff control of his core. The rigid motion, one step at a time, gave him an unnatural gait that made it slower for him to reach the counter. "Hello, what's your order?" The round-faced blonde girl behind the counter said with the same insincere hospitality that most workers have. The man turned away from me and faced the counter so I could not make out the interaction of their discussion as much as I tried to eavesdrop. But then, the girl looked in my direction and then back at the man. I wondered what it was about me that they discussed, so I looked away to avoid an awkward situation. I had been eating my food for the past 30 minutes already, and since I was the only one there the entire time, I might as well have stayed too long. "I'm sorry, sir. I can't make a word of what you were saying," the girl hinted, the insincerity of her smiling face fading in frustration. "Could you perhaps speak louder?" Yet there were no words from the man which I could hear. It was at this moment that I sensed things begin to go awry. The food which I had swallowed curled through the tube of my throat but refused to go any deeper. My senses were alert to the situation at the counter, but I feigned disinterest as I concerned myself with my food. My ears pricked, and I could hear the rustling of a paper bag in her hands, and not much else. "Would you like someone to help you? I don't speak sign language, I'm sorry." She spoke louder. I sensed an avoidable situation and thought it was wise to say something to help them. "Sir, do you need any help?" I said from where I sat. The man turned to me, and I was utterly mesmerized by his eyes. The strength of his glare fixated on me rendered his appearance in a different light to me. He opened his mouth and muttered something quiet. I scowled as my stomach hardened at the thought of this strange man. "Could you speak out?" I said, perplexed by his behavior. Then I turned to the girl at the counter. "Perhaps help him with something to eat. I'll fix it." The girl looked at me as though I had just spoken in a strange language. "What does he want?" she asked, after her temporary delay. "Sir, can you—" I was talking when the man interrupted me by shoving his hands into his coat to produce a steel cleaver with a shaped handle with wings at the tip. His eyes turned wild, and I could sense panic when he held the cleaver up. He regarded me briefly and suddenly at her. Then he set himself sideways between us so that he backed away slowly from our midst. "You found me here?" the man spoke. Sheer terror seized me, and I immediately turned numb in my seat. I broke into a small sweat as I reconciled the full implication of this man gone berserk with a large cleaver in his hands. He wielded it expertly, like one who had done so many times, and his disposition was of one who would waste no time to do it again. "Why do you persecute me?" he cried furiously. "You demons! I have escaped you all day, and now you would not allow me respite." He was still speaking when he suddenly burst into motion, springing towards the counter. The girl shrieked with fear at his charge, but moved too late, as did I, instinctively to her rescue. His blitz was unbelievable, even for a cop like myself who had seen such criminally swift people. He jumped behind the counter with ease and lifted his hand with the cleaver in it. Hell froze over and the anomaly bubbled up into the earth. I drew my gun from my hip as he took his first swing at her. She lifted her hands to defend herself and the cleaver came down on her with a chomp. Her cry was the most unnatural noise I had ever heard in a human. From him, it was a hysterical shriek of glee. I saw a man fully committed to his frenzy, and I knew what genuine fear was in that moment. I'd wanted nothing more than to have him arrested and take him in as I moved in with my gun pointed straight at him. "You have found me, and now, like the others, you have met your end," he said as he plucked the cleaver from her arm to take another swing. The second swing was a yell to end a short yawning pause. I was shaken by the depravity, and I lost my cool as I watched him go about butchering her as though she were a mere rag. Twice, he swung in a matter of seconds, and I had had enough. I released the safety of my pistol and pulled the trigger. The gun banged, and with one bullet to the base of his skull, the terror ended. He crashed on his side and was covered strangely in his trench coat. Good heavens! I regarded the man once, and I flushed at the horror I had just witnessed. I still could not believe it myself. I turned to my phone quickly and made the call to emergency services for the girl whose name I later found out was Sarah. Sarah made a recovery in 3 months, but I still think about that evening sometimes, and I get the shivers of its horrors all over again.
Are you going to say something? Or are you just going to keep staring? His right brow jumped to effect his query. The large bar of ring piercing on the bridge of his nose dragged his face askew. A whole part of his face was covered in a strange pattern tattoo so that there was hardly any portion of his skin left untouched. The other part of his face had 4 large ink streaks under his eyes, and except for that, the rest of his skin was visible. I smiled in admiration. "What's up, bro?" I muttered at last, gasping inquisitively as my eyes wandered down his face. The quality of his video, which made it hard to read through the text on his neck, scribbled in Arabic, cleared up enough when he moved in his seat. He replied that he was good, and he asked me how my day was. I was hesitant to drag into the ordinary chatter as I usually did with other Omegle users. His appearance was unique, and I knew if I spoke to him with more intent, I could be friends with this dude who had such strange tattoos and piercings. I was curious as to what adventurousness made a man alter his skin and his body, so I asked, "Hey man, what does it mean, the Arabic scribbling under your neck?" He blanched in his seat and looked away from the computer. There was nothing odd, I thought. Then he placed his hands on his neck and moved it open to expose it further for me. He rubbed on it briefly and smiled. "Manifest evil," he said, and his dark green eyes floated as though he would perceive a reaction from me. I nodded my head instead, unwilling to give myself to internet users and their playfulness. I knew people like him, those who desired to be something so badly that they would do anything to get the appearance of it. He cocked his head and waited. 4 streaks under your eyes? Kind of strange, I cackled, trying to ease his expectation. "Means something to me," he said, and paused. Of course I mused. All tattoos meant something to the bearer. I thought to probe. I asked what it meant, playfully, running my hands over the keyboard of my computer. "For each soul I've taken, I tattoo a streak," he said. "Marcel Dunbar, Rachel Swift, Kane Orson, Daniel Ha, all unbelievers." I burst into laughter because I thought it was hilarious that a man would say something so silly with such a straight face. Well, he did not seem as amused as I was. Instead, he looked puzzled, offended, perhaps, that I did not believe him. He read my thoughts. "You don't believe me?" I stopped laughing at once,
and I shot him a glance of incredulity. Who would believe a man who has 4 streaks to evidence his killings on his face? It was the internet. People tried to be funny all the time. When time drifted slowly past and this man did not smile, I became worried. I contemplated the skip icon, but I was too intrigued to do so. I wanted to see the end of the game. Jamie Dunn. He called my name, and then proceeded to call out my address. The worst sin man can commit is in unbelief. You have to pay for your sins, and your punishment comes swiftly this hour. He stared stiffly into the camera and produced a blood-stained sickle, which he rubbed skillfully under his eyes. Truly, he took on the appearance of pure evil, because the sight sent shivers down my spine. It was all of that which he said before the screen went blank. My stomach sank, and I froze in terror as his words played over and over in my head. Whatever it meant was not good. My respiration turned shallow, and I placed my hands on my chest to steady my panicked breathing. The more I considered the threat, the more the situation unraveled to me. Manifest Evil, as he called himself, knew my name and my house address. He knew my name and my house address? It was impossible. My heart pounded and I began to perspire. I had never told him my name all the while we had spoken, and from what image I could make of his features, I could tell he was a man given to evil. I scolded myself for not listening to my gut when I'd been led to skip him. I picked up my phone frantically and dialed the emergency numbers in fear. The phone beeped, and I immediately began to regret having called. In the mire of my own thoughts, I could not make out a stream of clear thinking which I could present to the police. Well, I called, and they took up the call. An officer who introduced himself with a mouthful told me to stay calm. Then I could sense how dismissive he was. It occurred to me, too, that it was ridiculous to believe an Omegle user whom I'd ticked off could follow through on a murder threat. Yet, somehow, I could tell that Manifest Evil was no murderer. He was a killer. He felt no purpose in his action, and he gained no thrill from it besides the need to quell instinct. I tried to explain, but the connection to the police went off. I sat in silent disbelief, wondering if I was indeed being terrified over nothing, even though I could sense danger closing in, suffocating me. I turned off my computer and sat still for minutes that multiplied as I thought of ways to assess and articulate the danger I felt. It didn't make sense, but it worsened until I was completely drenched in sweat. I knew to trust my gut when the vision of his vicious face flashed across my mind. I turned my hand over and wiped off the sweat that had beaded along the line of my head, and I called the cops again. I whimpered and exaggerated the incident as much as I could, wondering why I had done so myself. It was worth it, because as soon as I was done speaking, I was assured that a patrol team was on its way to my house. I hung up the call, and at the same time, a persistent knock came at my door. Oxygen dragged its way through my nostril. I panicked. "Who's there?" "I'm here to collect." Cryptic answer returned to me. I gasped at the surreality of the moment. He truly was at my door, and I could not be more grateful that I had trusted my gut. His voice was unchanged. "Who?" I asked, and sirens blaring began to approach. My ease was short-lived because he thwacked my door with his sickle, tearing into the wood with all of his might to get to me. I felt myself tumbling through emotions as I beheld my worst nightmare in real time. He whacked the door a couple more times as the cop's siren grew louder until I was numb to all sensation. When there was some space through the door so we could both see each other, he smashed his shoulder. Life reeled so unbelievably slow that I fell into passivity. One shot broke through the air, and I snapped from my reverie as I watched him fall away from my door. The cops rushed up towards him, and pee trickled down my pants as I felt relief flush through me. "He's dead," the cops declared.
Yo, Jose! The night's tranquil atmosphere was interrupted by the shrill call. The caller was familiar. The man who called marched briskly from the dark corridors of the storehouse into the light. His features were indistinct, but the shaky note of his alarm had been enough to stop me in my tracks. I flushed upon recognition. I smiled. He did not. My disposition changed to mirror his demeanor. There was a briskness to his stride, all too alert to not have been deliberate. The smile on my face waned as his strange manners continued. I recognized the discomfort on the man's face as soon as he came to the light. It was a scowl that did not reveal irritation, but concern. Deep concern. I turned from my sideways stance to face him. "What's up, man?" I asked, puzzled. "Some funny shit's going on," he gulped anxiously. He licked his lips and paused to confirm I was attentive to what he was saying. "I was just looking at my post when I saw something strange. Something's not right tonight." "A thief?" My heart sank. It was for this reason that I had always hated the night shift. During the day, there were very few thieving people to deal with. Even though incidents like these happened during the day, they were scarce and far in between. I sighed as the heat of my body burned at this news. Malcolm, for that was the name of my black colleague who was in front of me, stirred quickly and looked over his shoulder. I looked in the same direction. "I hate these types of nights, man," I lamented coolly. "Hell no," Malcolm fumed. "I don't want to have to deal with any of the crazies." "Crazies?" I recoiled. "I think he's armed with a pickaxe. I could make that out before I ducked away," Malcolm revealed. My heart bumped against my chest painfully, snatching my breath. What type of f***er walked the night with a pickaxe? An awry feeling swept through the atmosphere, and even though I had not seen the threat, I maintained a healthy sense of dread. "We should call the cops," I moaned, quivering as I spoke. Malcolm assessed me briefly with a scowl and furrowed brows. There was a choice to be made. It was company policy that the guards should never work at night with cell phones because it could distract them from the work they were employed to do. There was only one telephone in the storehouse. The trouble was to decide who would go get it. Malcolm did not seem interested. Whatever he had seen had shaken him terribly. His eyes were white as snow, and his respiration was inconsistent. I had the feeling that the man wanted nothing more than to leave. Malcolm's horror corrupted me, and my fear of the unknown axe carrier was heightened. "I have a daughter. I can't get hacked by some deranged fucker with a pickaxe," Malcolm revealed, and as he spoke, his eyes drifted to the dark corner from where he had just emerged. Again, my gaze was directed by Malcolm's, and our world suddenly fell quiet. The mixture of darkness and the sudden silence was a potent omen of something terrible. The air was palpably thicker, and it took effort to rally oxygen into the lungs. Pressure made my vision blurry. I peered into the formless black area, and my heart spasmed violently. Someone was there in the blackness, taunting us. I could make out the aspect in the darkness when I squinted. The delay to emerge was deliberate, calculated to allow us to shiver in fear. In some way, I considered it thrilling, or I would have run as quickly as my feet could carry me from the danger. "Hey, come out into the light right now!" I demanded as I stepped forward carefully. Malcolm did not move, and I could tell from his shaky breath that he would not move. The noise of metal scraping against the floor defiantly, rebelling my order, made my blood run cold in my body. The feeling of my confidence so crudely snatched made me stagger steps backwards. Then he heard the footsteps marching forward heavily. I realized my folly. I was unarmed, and I stood a slim chance against someone or something, for I did not know which it was, with such a vicious tool. My confidence in Malcolm had been misguided, and I had been only made to realize it when it was too late. He held his breath and bid the moment of revelation with a foggy mind. Time crept slowly, painfully slowly, and I struggled to reconcile my audacity in the face of potent danger. As soon as the man appeared, my world spun. The man's physique was athletic, with a well-proportioned form that caught my attention. His heavy chest was like massive balloons from how huge they were. His superhuman mass of muscle was distracting, taking my focus from the tool which he bore in his hand. He did not speak, but I had already mentally created a bass tone for his voice. "I don't know what you want, man," I chugged, pale from horror. I looked to my side, and Malcolm peeled away farther from the confrontation. "Just walk away, man. This is private property." The man swung the pickaxe from the floor and pointed his finger at me. Instinctively, I looked at the finger, and I was hypnotized. The man started to make his way towards Malcolm with his finger pointed out, and I could do nothing. "Shit!" Malcolm blurted, and in the same motion bolted into the night. I froze in fear, paralyzed by a force stronger than my instinct to flee. I called to my feet, but it failed me, and I was like one fixed to the spot. My knees wobbled, and my entire body trembled with matching violence as the man's pace increased. My eyes drifted to the pickaxe, and I swallowed, registering what I knew was certain death. "Stop right there, man!" I cried, watching my whole life slowly slip into nothingness. I paled white, and my temperature fell to a defeating chill. It was fear like I had never known, which made me numb. "Who are you? What do you want?" The man would not say, and there was no way to know. I sensed my breathing slowly failing. In a strange way, as time moved slower, the events were happening faster. The man did not blink as he marched, driven by the lust to kill. When he was an arm away from me, he stopped and put his finger down. With both hands, he gripped the handle of his pickaxe and heaved it backwards with no effort. "No!" I cried, and suddenly broke out of the freeze. I swung my body against the man as the pickaxe reeled forward. My intervention broke his motion. He visibly got irritated by this and struck his arm out against my face ferociously. I crashed to the floor, vulnerable to attack. The man jumped on the chance and lifted his pickaxe behind his head. I closed my eyes and expected a quick death. The glint in the man's eyes were as white as the moon, emotionless and without known intent. He was like a difficult machine to stop, and all I could do in my surrender was put my hands out and carve my mouth to utter a plea for mercy. I fought against the bitter taste of death and wondered why I must die that way. Yet I surrendered without question. "Die, you crazy guy!" Malcolm blurted as loud as the gunshot which rang in the air. As the steel hook of the axe hit the ground with a loud clang behind him, the man fell in a heap on the floor. I watched for a few moments as though I had been in a terrible dream. When I confirmed my reality, I quickly sprung up, my body tensing with adrenaline, and I turned to confront Malcolm. "Is he dead?" I asked breathlessly. "It's a headshot," Malcolm answered. "This is why I always keep a sticky in the bag."